Clients of a South Dakota-based CPA firm are receiving notices that their information is possibly included in a data breach.
First Alert investigator Beth Warden telling us of denial that transformed to confirmation just over a 9-month span.
In April of 2023, several clients of ELO CPAs and advisors contacted the company asking questions about a possible data breach after falling victim to identity theft. Lynn Odland, a former client of ELO, heard about the concerns too.
When the conversation started that there was a potential data breach back in last June approximately,
he wasn't overly concerned until he received a notification that his information could have been violated. Attorney General Marty Jackley confirms the ELO breach is under investigation.
The company has to let the individuals whose personal confidential information is out know about that so they can take proper actions to fix that. And then if it's a significant enough breach, the company must let the Attorney General know if it's over 250 people that it affects.
The question is, when did ELO discover the breach? If they didn't notify within 60 days of the discovery?
It can be a misdemeanor if it's under $1,000. It can be a felony if it's more than that. It can be $10,000 a day, so that's pretty significant.
I explained to Jackley my face-to-face meeting with then CEO Eric Christensen 8 months ago. He firmly denied any breach.
What are your thoughts about that?
My thoughts are this. I would encourage any of your viewers that if they believe they have been affected by a potential breach, either losing their personal or confidential information, to let the Attorney General's Consumer Division know. And that'll help us do two things. Number one, better protect them to try to make sure we can do everything we can with respect to protecting their credit and this information. And it'll also help in our investigation to determine what did the company know and when, so that we can adequately enforce South Dakota's breach laws.
Christensen is no longer with ELO CPAs. A partner said the parting was a mutual decision the end of December, and the departure was not related to the breach.
quite disappointing. Glad that we now know for sure, but it's too bad that this couldn't have been all brought up when you first detected something was wrong back in May or June.
In Sioux Falls, Beth Warden, Dakota News Now.